So Andy Ruiz defeats Luis Ortiz on a 12-round unanimous decision. The judges recorded scorecards of 114-111 twice and 113-112. Now, Ruiz dropped Ortiz 3 times, and upon hearing that, you might think it was an exciting fight. Well, you'd be wrong, because this was actually a pretty boring fight for the most part. Both guys were very cautious, particularly Andy Ruiz. Ortiz had the luxury, being the taller guy with the longer arms, of at least utilizing his jab in the slow rounds, and most of the rounds were slow rounds. Andy Ruiz caught Ortiz with a big right hand in the second round and dropped him. And Ortiz got up, Ruiz went in again, dropped him for a second time. At that point, it looked like an early night for Andy Ruiz. But as he rushed in, following the second knockdown to try and finish Ortiz, he was caught with several big left hands. And from that moment on, Ruiz was more cautious. Now, based upon what I saw in the first round, I think it was always Ruiz's game plan to box the way he did. But I suspect he would have taken a few more chances and thrown a few more right hands had he not been caught with those big shots in the second round after he floored Ortiz twice. I always felt as though this would be a difficult stylistic matchup for Andy Ruiz, particularly at this weight. If he'd been lighter, let's say the same weight as he was against Arreola, then I think he would have been able to lead off more and wouldn't have had to have relied on Ortiz overreaching or leaning in before catching him with a counter right hand. I think he would have been able to let his hands go more often because he'd be able to close the distance more quickly against the longer-armed fighter. But at this weight, he was limited, as I say, to waiting for Ortiz to do something before he countered. Now, Andy Ruiz is a natural counterpuncher. Luis Ortiz is a natural counterpuncher. But as I say, there were even more opportunities to counter Andy Ruiz would have had if he was a bit lighter. In any event, the fight progressed. Ortiz was doing some pretty good work at long range with his jab. And it was so boring at times that the crowd actually started booing. And this was a Mexican pro-Ruiz crowd. They all came out for him. But they were booing him because he just wasn't putting in the kind of performance that they were expecting. Now, as the fight progressed, Ortiz looked as though he was wilting a little bit. He did get dropped again. I forget which round it was now. Yeah, round 7. And it was maybe round 8 or 9. There was another round late in the fight where Ortiz came under attack. Ruiz managed to catch him with some counters, put some shots together. And he looked like he was there for the taking. But Ruiz didn't go for it. He let Ortiz survive because, I guess, again, the memory of those big left hands in the second round. So fight went on, and Luis Ortiz actually ended up finishing the stronger of the two in the 12th round, where he hit Ruiz with several big shots, appeared to stun him a little bit, and Ruiz was actually trying to hold on and smother Luis Ortiz towards the end, which surprised me somewhat because I expected Andy Ruiz to finish the stronger. I thought he'd have problems in this fight early, again, because of the southpaw stance. The fact that he came in at nearly 270 pounds means he was going to have slow feet. So how was he going to bridge the gap that orthodox fighters always have to bridge against southpaws? Because the right hand, the backhand of the orthodox fighter has to travel further against the southpaw than it does against an orthodox fighter. This is the problem. When you're a slow-footed guy like Ruiz, very fast hands, yes, still very impressive hand speed, very explosive. But you need to get your feet in position first before you can let that right hand go, or you're going to be overreaching and you're going to get clipped with Ortiz's left hand. So I always felt as though Ruiz would have issues stylistically, but I felt he'd come through because of his youth, his toughness, and ultimately Ortiz's waning punch resistance. I mean, he got dropped in his last fight by a jab from Charles Martin. And look, I've seen lots of fighters get dropped by jabs. Anthony Yarde against Kovalev, even way back in the days, Nigel Benn against Michael Watson. But those were in situations where they were absolutely spent physically. They'd been beaten up, they were tired, and they get hit with jabs, which they'd been taken fine in previous rounds, but it was just an accumulation of punishment. But that wasn't the case with Luis Ortiz against Charles Martin. He was fresh when he got dropped with that jab. So, alarming signs. People were talking about Andy Ruiz's punch resistance. I always felt that Ortiz's punch resistance was more alarming in that Charles Martin fight. And again, that's one of the reasons I picked Ruiz to win this fight, was I just didn't trust Ortiz's punch resistance in the long haul. At some point, Ruiz is going to clip this guy, and he's probably going to go down. And that did happen 3 times. But to Luis Ortiz's credit, he showed lots of heart, as he always has. He fired back when Ruiz went in to finish him, and he kept him honest and managed to survive. Or let me not even say survive, because he finished stronger, managed to last the 12 rounds. So I didn't score it round by round. There are going to be some people out there who maybe gave it to Ortiz. I think that there were so many rounds open to interpret. There were certain rounds, slow rounds, that Ortiz won for sure. But there were other slow rounds, particularly in the first half of the fight, where there really wasn't much in it. And it's whose work do you prefer? There was very little work by either man in so many of the rounds. So you have to figure that they're swing rounds. They could go either way. So I don't really have an issue with the way it was scored, particularly with the knockdowns. I mean, you look at those scorecards without the knockdowns, you know, you guys out there tell me what it would have been. I can't figure out the maths off the top of my head. But it would have been close, or maybe, well, on one of the judges' scorecards at least, it would have been a Luis Ortiz victory if it wasn't for those 3 knockdowns that Andy Ruiz scored. So there you have it. I thought it was a poor fight, but in retrospect, I guess we should have expected something like this, because Andy Ruiz is a front foot counterpuncher. Ortiz is a southpaw counterpuncher, and they kind of canceled each other out. That's what it was. Now, boxing fans are very reactionary, and I'm seeing this already in my Element group. People are saying that Andy Ruiz is done. He's going to get destroyed by Wilder if he fights like this, and he looks so slow, etc. I think the Deontay Wilder fight would be completely different. I don't think it'll be anything like this. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, Ruiz was really struggling to get to grips with a southpaw, the right hand having to travel much further against the southpaw than would be the case with an orthodox fighter. Also, despite the fact that Luis Ortiz has lost to Deontay Wilder twice, Ortiz is the better fighter technically than Wilder. He's got better balance, he's better coordinated, and he doesn't lunge in as much, he doesn't make as many mistakes. And therefore, it's going to mean there's less opportunities for Andy Ruiz to land his shots, to land his counters. And because of the southpaw stance, he wasn't able to fight in the style that he normally would. Because if Andy Ruiz was fighting in his normal pressure fighting style, coming forward with kind of squared up shoulders and a high guard, he'd be getting hit with a lot more left hands down the pipe. So I think it was a strategic decision by his team to fight this way, which is basically the typical way that most orthodox fighters fight against southpaws. It's battle of the backhands. The orthodox right hand against the southpaw's left hand, with the southpaw throwing more jabs. Most southpaw versus orthodox fights look very similar to that in terms of that dynamic. Yeah, the southpaw's getting off his jab in the backhand counter, and the orthodox fighter is really not jabbing much at all, just looking for a straight right hand or a looping right hand. So, yeah, I think that the style matchup was bad for Andy Ruiz. I think that Deontay Wilder is a better style matchup for him. I know people are going to say, that's crazy, Hatman, you can't be serious after this performance. Oh, I'm very serious. I'm not saying that Andy Ruiz wins that fight necessarily, but I think he'll apply a lot more pressure against Wilder. I think he'll have a lot more opportunities to counter against Wilder than he did against Ortiz, because Ortiz is technically better, and it's harder to draw mistakes out of Ortiz because he has that, very good technical background. Whereas with Wilder, you can draw mistakes out of him more easily. Wilder also telegraphs his punches a lot more than Luis Ortiz. So Ruiz is going to be able to see when Wilder's about to throw something. Wilder often will really cock back that right hand like he's throwing a javelin or something, or a shot put, And a guy like Andy Ruiz is going to notice those little tells, and he's going to be able to block and counter, or duck underneath and counter. So I expect a very different fight if he goes in there against Wilder. I think it will be a very competitive fight. Now, with regards to, again, Andy Ruiz's weight, there are some who say that his punch resistance was poor against Arreola, and that if he had continued at that weight, maybe he would have got knocked out by Ortiz. Maybe he wouldn't have been able to take those big shots and stay on his feet. But as I said in my pre-fight video, losing a lot of weight, like Andy Ruiz did for the Arreola fight, it can take a lot out of you. It can take strength out of you, and it can affect your punch resistance in the short term, because in order for him to lose that weight, he would have had to cut a lot of calories, and he would have had to train harder than normal. You see, that takes some adjusting to. You're not just going to adjust to it overnight. It's going to take some time to adjust. But once you do adjust, once your body gets used to that weight and used to that calorie intake, you're going to be much the better for it, in my view. But Andy Ruiz was looking for a way out because he didn't like that Spartan lifestyle that Eddie Reynoso and Canelo had him living. And he found the excuse that he was looking for in that Arreola fight, especially with people telling him, oh, you're better when you're heavy. You know, your punch resistance is better when you're heavy. You're stronger when you're heavy. He's got no reason then to persist because everybody's telling him not to persist. You see? So I think that's really unfortunate, but it is what it is. Andy is who he is. And I guess this is the version that we're going to have of him for the rest of his career. But such as it is, I still think the Wilder fight is very interesting. I think it's very competitive. I don't see Wilder just wiping him out in a couple of rounds like a lot of people seem to think. And we have to see how Wilder looks against Robert Helenius. We're all assuming that Wilder's going to come through. And it wasn't very encouraging to hear that. I mean, I knew that Wilder had sparred Helenius in the past several times, but it wasn't encouraging to hear Wilder say that him and Helenius are actually really tight. They're friends. I mean, dear oh dear, that's not what you want to hear, because that would suggest that Deontay Wilder maybe has a psychological hold over this guy being his sparring partner, you know, for several camps. If he's a guy who comes in and he's sticking it on Wilder and it's a war every time they step in the ring and he's really belligerent, I wonder whether Wilder would have him back in camp. Do you know what I mean? That's the feeling I get about that camp. Whereas a guy like Helenius, he's shown a lack of heart in many of his fights. And so I suspect that he has been on the receiving end and very much in sparring partner mode in those sparring sessions against Wilder. And there's a high likelihood that that's going to translate over to their professional fight. That Helenius is just going to stay in sparring partner mode. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we get the best of Helenius so we can see the most entertaining spectacle possible from these two guys. But yeah, not good hearing that Wilder really likes him and they're close and all this kind of stuff. I mean, the last time we heard that from Wilder about one of his sparring partners, well, in fact, I'm not sure whether they ever sparred, but they certainly fought, and that was Audley Harrison. Remember him talking about how Audley Harrison was his brother from another mother and all that, and he came in and just wiped the floor with the guy. That was one of the wildest finishes from Wilder ever, where he was virtually on his knees swinging punches at Harrison. It was just a bizarre sight. Anyway, Andy Ruiz moves on. Next fight, potentially Deontay Wilder, if Wilder comes through, Robert Helenius. Let me know what you guys thought about his performance against Ortiz. Were you impressed? Were you unimpressed? You know, if I'm going to mention some positives for Andy Ruiz, because I've been mainly focusing on some negatives, I would say that his hand speed's still very impressive. I thought that the right hand counter that he was throwing, see, this is what I was unsure of going into this fight. I didn't know how Ruiz would approach the southpaw, because Ruiz has never really shown that great a straight right hand before down the pipe. He normally loops his shots, and he was looping some right hands here too. But there was also a lot of good straight right hands, good short straight shots from Ruiz with that right hand. I was quite impressed by that. So that was good. His punch resistance, again, at the heavier weight with a lot more calories, stronger and all that, seemed to be better. I know he wasn't keen on taking too many risks against Ortiz. But whenever he did get clipped, he didn't go down. And those appeared to be better shots than the ones he got hit with from Chris Arreola, which put him over. Here against Luis Ortiz, he was able to take him, particularly the big left hand in the second round. That was a real flush shot. I mean, Ortiz couldn't have hit him any cleaner. And Ruiz ate it up. So the chin appeared to be there. The hand speed is definitely there. And as I say, that right hand was quite nice. When he managed to get his slow feet in position to be able to land it, it was a nice shot. And one more point I forgot to make. Against the southpaw, Andy Ruiz is unable to use one of his best punches, and that's the left hook. Difficult to land left hooks against southpaws, particularly southpaws who fight square on. Side on, like Luis Ortiz. If you're fighting a southpaw that fights a bit more square on, it's easier to land your left hook. But when the guy's really side on like Ortiz and he's taller than you, very, very tough to land your hook. Against Deontay Wilder, Ruiz is going to find a lot more opportunities to land his left hook. A lot more opportunities to counter with combinations. In this fight, it was really countering with 1 or 2 shots because of the fast left hand back from the southpaw in exchanges. With Deontay Wilder, it's not like that. He throws one right hand and there's more of a gap, in between. And Wilder, when he does start exchanging, often starts flailing. They're not real clean shots. And with Andy Ruiz, the shorter arms and the shorter punches, I can see him doing damage if Wilder starts flailing. Wilder would be well advised to stick to single right hands against Andy Ruiz and just keep him on the outside and don't get involved in exchanges. And if Deontay Wilder's to win the Andy Ruiz fight, in my head, it has to be quite a negative performance from Wilder. If he starts getting involved and exchanging too much, he's going to leave himself open to counters, and he isn't as technically sound as Ortiz. So he's going to get clipped clean more often than Ortiz did if he decides to do that, in my view. So, I look forward to that fight if it happens, if Wilder gets past Robert Helenius. Again, let me know what you guys think about that one as well in the comments below. So, until next time, I'm out.